For 5 centuries, his name has been a byword for tyranny. Richard III, the hunchbacked monster, the wicked uncle who, we're told, murdered his own nephews to seize the throne. This is the story immortalized by Shakespeare, the version of events that has been taught and accepted as historical fact. But what if it's not? What if the story we think we know is actually one of the most successful and enduring smear campaigns in all of history? What if Richard III was not the villain, but the victim of a brilliant conspiracy designed to secure his rival's crown? Today, we are reopening one of history's most compelling cold cases, the disappearance of the princes in the Tower. We will sift through the evidence, consider the suspects, and ask the crucial question: was Richard III a monster, or was he framed? The making of a monster. To understand the accusation, we first have to understand the accusers. The story of Richard the Monster was not written in his own time. It was crafted after his death by those who served the ultimate victor of the Wars of the Roses, Henry Tudor, the man who became King Henry VII. When Richard was killed at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, the new Tudor dynasty had a problem. It needed to justify its violent seizure of power. And what better way to do that than to paint the king they had overthrown as an unnatural, child-killing tyrant? The narrative really takes shape with Sir Thomas More, whose History of King Richard III provides a chilling, moment-by-moment account of the murder. More's story is visceral and packed with damning detail. He alleges Richard hired a knight, Sir James Tyrrell, who then ordered 2 assassins to smother the sleeping princes with their pillows. This is the version that was seized upon by Tudor chroniclers and, most famously of all, by William Shakespeare. Shakespeare's play, Richard III, is a work of theatrical genius, but it is also a masterpiece of Tudor propaganda. It cemented the image of Richard as physically deformed and morally bankrupt, a caricature that has dominated public perception for centuries. But here is the fundamental problem. For all its power, this story is not supported by any direct, impartial evidence from the period. It was a narrative constructed from rumour, hearsay, and political necessity. Whispers of the prince's deaths did circulate, even reaching the French court. Yet no formal accusation was ever made against Richard during his reign. Even Henry VII's Bill of Attainder, which listed Richard's many alleged crimes, only made a vague charge of unnatural murders in shedding of infants' blood, without specifically naming the princes. The story as we know it is a perfect piece of political character assassination. And for half a millennium, it has been astonishingly effective. But the moment we begin to peel back the layers of propaganda, the official case begins to unravel. The investigation, a kingdom in crisis. Our cold case begins in April 1483. The formidable warrior king, Edward IV, dies suddenly at the age of just 41. His death throws the entire kingdom into uncertainty. He leaves behind 2 sons, the heir, now King Edward V, who is only 12 years old, and his 9-year-old brother Richard, Duke of York. In the brutal political landscape of medieval England, a boy king was a guarantee of instability. It opened up a dangerous power vacuum where ambitious nobles would inevitably fight for control. This was the ever-present threat of the Wars of the Roses, the dynastic civil war between the houses of Lancaster and York that had fractured England for decades. Edward IV had managed to impose a fragile peace, but his unexpected death threatened to plunge the realm back into chaos. By the late king's own wishes and the customs of the realm, there was one man with the authority to manage this crisis: Edward's younger brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. Richard was a loyal lieutenant to his brother, a respected commander, and an experienced politician who governed the notoriously unruly north of England. He was named Lord Protector of the realm, tasked with safeguarding his nephew, the young Edward V, and steering the country until the boy came of age. Richard was in the north when he received the news and set out for London. But on his journey south, he heard alarming reports. The Queen's family, the Woodvilles, were moving quickly to secure power for themselves. To many of the established nobility, the Woodvilles were greedy upstarts, having risen to prominence only through the King's controversial marriage to Elizabeth Woodville. Now, it appeared they were attempting to bypass the appointed Lord Protector and rule through the boy king. For Richard, this was more than a political squabble. It was a direct threat to the stability of the kingdom and to the Yorkist dynasty his family had fought and died to establish. The stage was set for a confrontation that would alter the course of English history. The Protector and the Coup. Acting with the authority of his office, Richard intercepted the young King Edward V on his journey to London. He arrested the key Woodville nobles in the king's party, including his influential uncle and tutor, Anthony Woodville. For Richard's supporters, this was a decisive and necessary action to secure the government and shield the king from the Woodville's ambitions. For his enemies, it was the first sinister step in a calculated grab for power. The young king was then lodged in the Tower of London. Now, to our modern ears, that sounds ominous, but the Tower was not merely a prison. It was a royal palace, the traditional residence for a monarch awaiting their coronation. Shortly after, Richard convinced Queen Elizabeth Woodville, who had fled into sanctuary at Westminster Abbey, to release her younger son, the 9-year-old Richard, Duke of York. He was to join his brother in the Tower, ostensibly to provide companionship. The two princes were now together, under their uncle's protection. The last reliable public sightings of the boys occurred in the early summer of 1483. One account from mid-June describes them playing in the Tower gardens. But then, everything changed. During preparations for the coronation, Richard made a truly shocking announcement. He presented testimony from a bishop, Robert Stillington, who claimed that the late King Edward IV had entered into a pre-contract of marriage with another woman, Lady Eleanor Butler, before he secretly married Elizabeth Woodville. In the 15th century, a pre-contract was as legally binding as a wedding ceremony. If this claim was true, it meant Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville was bigamous and therefore invalid. And if the marriage was invalid, all of their children were illegitimate. An Act of Parliament, known as Titulus Regius, was passed, which officially declared the two princes bastards and barred them from the throne. With his brother's sons legally disqualified, the line of succession fell to the next legitimate heir, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. On the 6th of July, 1483, he was crowned King Richard III. He had gone from Lord Protector to King in less than 3 months. And sometime during that summer, the two boys he had sworn to protect, the princes in the Tower, vanished, never to be seen alive again. The case for the prosecution. So let's approach this as a modern cold case, beginning with the prime suspect, King Richard III. The case against him has always rested on 3 pillars: motive, means, and opportunity. First, the motive. So long as the princes were alive, they were a potent symbol of opposition. Even though they had been declared illegitimate, any rival could still rally a cause around them, claiming their disinheritance was an injustice. The brutal logic of the Wars of the Roses was that deposed claimants were rarely left alive. They were simply too dangerous, magnets for rebellion. For Richard to truly secure his throne, political necessity seemed to demand their elimination. He had the most to gain. Second, the means and opportunity. The princes were last seen inside the Tower of London, a royal fortress under Richard's absolute control. No one could enter or leave without the king's knowledge and permission. He had total command over their environment, their guards, and ultimately, their fate. If he gave an order, it would have been carried out. And third, there is his silence. When rumours about the prince's deaths began to circulate, Richard never produced the boys to prove they were alive, an act that would have instantly silenced his critics. He never launched a public inquiry. He never pointed the finger at anyone else. Even after his former ally, the Duke of Buckingham, launched a major rebellion against him, Richard could easily have blamed Buckingham for the murders to deflect suspicion. He never did. For many historians, this silence is deafening. It suggests he couldn't produce the boys because they were already dead, and he couldn't blame anyone else because the order had come from him. The circumstantial evidence is, without question, powerful. The case for the defense. But is the case really so straightforward? Let's now examine the evidence for the defense. First, we must challenge the sources themselves. As we've established, the most famous accounts of the murder were written years later by men like Thomas More, who were serving the very Tudor regime that had deposed Richard. These were not impartial chronicles. They were works of propaganda designed to legitimize the new king, Henry VII, as a national saviour. There is not a single contemporary first-hand account of the murder. It is all based on rumour that was later consolidated into historical fact. Second, there is the matter of Richard's character. Before the Tudor narrative took hold, Richard had a reputation for piety, justice, and loyalty. His personal motto was "Loyauté me lie," loyalty binds me. While a motto can, of course, be betrayed, it sits uneasily with the portrait of a man driven by ruthless, single-minded ambition. The discovery of his skeleton in a Leicester car park in 2012 was a remarkable moment. It confirmed he had severe scoliosis, a curved spine, but he was not the twisted, malevolent hunchback of Shakespeare's imagination. That physical discovery serves as a powerful reminder that the man himself has been twisted by centuries of propaganda. Third, the logic of the crime itself is questionable. If Richard had decided to kill the boys, why would he do it in secret? Announcing their deaths, perhaps from a sudden illness, and holding a grand state funeral would have been far more politically astute. It would have extinguished any hope his opponents had of using them. By allowing their fate to remain a mystery, he let damning rumours fester and inadvertently created a powerful rallying cry for his enemies, who could always claim the princes were alive and needed to be rescued. It gave him the worst of all worlds. He shouldered all the blame for their murder, with none of the political certainty of their confirmed deaths. Finally, some researchers, such as those in Philippa Langley's Missing Princes project, have put forward the highly debated theory that the princes weren't murdered in the Tower at all. This theory suggests they survived and later re-emerged as the pretenders Lambert Simnel and Perkin Warbeck, who challenged Henry VII's throne. While this is certainly not a mainstream historical view, it highlights the fact that we cannot simply assume the boys died in 1483. The central point remains. After more than 500 years, we have no body, no weapon, and no confession. The other suspects. If we are to treat this as a genuine cold case, we cannot afford to have tunnel vision. So, if we entertain the possibility that Richard didn't do it, who else might have? Suspect number 2, Henry Stafford, the Duke of Buckingham. Buckingham was Richard's closest ally, his right-hand man during his seizure of power. What was his motive? He possessed his own distant but legitimate claim to the throne. Some historians have speculated that Buckingham might have killed the princes on his own initiative, perhaps assuming it was what the king wanted, or, more cynically, to destabilize Richard's new reign so that he could make a bid for the crown himself. His opportunity is certainly plausible. As High Constable of England, he wielded considerable authority. The timeline is also deeply suspicious. Just months after helping Richard become king, Buckingham led a massive rebellion against him. Why this sudden, dramatic betrayal? When Richard had Buckingham captured and executed for treason, he condemned him as the most untrue creature living. Was this a king mourning the treachery of a friend, or a man realizing his accomplice had just become a dangerous liability? Suspect number 3. Lady Margaret Beaufort. Now, this theory is more controversial, but she cannot be dismissed from our inquiry. Margaret Beaufort was the mother of the leading Lancastrian claimant to the throne, Henry Tudor, who was living in exile. She was a woman of formidable ambition who had spent her entire life manoeuvring to place her son on the throne. Her motive was absolutely clear. With Edward IV's sons out of the way, her own son Henry's claim became exponentially stronger. This was especially true if he could marry the prince's sister, Elizabeth of York, and unite the warring houses of York and Lancaster. And this is precisely what happened. It was Margaret who secretly brokered that very marriage alliance. For her grand plan to succeed, the princes had to vanish. The primary argument against her involvement is her lack of direct access to the Tower. But supporters of this theory argue that as a wealthy, well-connected noblewoman, she could have used her network of spies or bribed guards to get the deed done. For 500 years, the world has largely accepted the story of Richard III, the child-killing monster. It is a simple, horribly compelling narrative written by the victors and immortalized by the world's greatest playwright. And yet, the moment you begin to examine it as a cold case, the certainties dissolve into questions. We have our prime suspect, Richard III, for whom the motive, means, and opportunity seem to align so perfectly. The fact remains that the boys disappeared on his watch, and his subsequent silence is damning. But we also have Henry Stafford, Duke of Buckingham, the ambitious kingmaker with royal blood and a puzzling, violent break from the king he helped create. And we must consider Margaret Beaufort, the Tudor matriarch, a woman of breathtaking ambition whose son gained everything from the prince's disappearance. Finally, there is the explosive, if unproven, possibility that there was no murder in the Tower at all, that the princes survived only to be erased from the record by a new dynasty that could not afford for them to exist. The discovery of Richard's body proved that the physical man was not the monster of Tudor propaganda. It forced us to reconsider the character assassination he has endured for so long. Perhaps it is also time to reconsider the ultimate crime of which he stands accused. With no definitive proof and no bodies, this 500-year-old mystery remains powerfully, tantalizingly unsolved. The Tudor version of events may have passed into legend, but the case itself is far from closed. What do you think? Was Richard III a ruthless killer? Was he framed by his closest ally, or by the mother of his great rival? Or did the princes somehow escape their fate? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. And if you want to continue digging into history's greatest unanswered questions, please be sure to like this video and subscribe for more.